On September 22, 1942, at 6:47 a.m., a German patrol of 12 men moved through the shattered ruins of Stalingrad. The temperature was already 18 degrees Celsius, but they couldn't feel it. The city was burning. Smoke hung in the air like a living thing, thick and black, carrying the stench of cordite and burnt flesh. The men were part of the Sixth Army, the Wehrmacht's elite, fresh from victories at Kiev, at Minsk, at Smolensk. They had rolled across Russia like a storm, crushing everything in their path. Their boots crunched on broken glass and spent shell casings. Stalingrad was supposed to fall in a week. It had been 3 months. 3 months of grinding, brutal, house-to-house combat. 3 months of watching their comrades disappear into the rubble. They were confident but cautious. This was not a forest. This was not an open field, where their tactics had always worked. This was a graveyard of concrete, a maze of death where every window was a potential coffin. The buildings were skeletal, their facades torn away, exposing the internal organs of the city. Twisted rebar jutted out like broken bones. They moved in tactical formation, covering each other's movements. They saw no one. The ruins were silent, except for the distant thunder of artillery. They were wrong. The first shot came from nowhere. A flat, distant crack, barely audible over the rumble of distant artillery. The lieutenant at the front stopped mid-step, confused. His sergeant, 40 meters behind him, simply fell forward into the rubble. No cry, no warning. He was just gone. The lieutenant spun around. He saw nothing, just smoke, just ruins. The second shot came 4 seconds later. This time, it was the radio man, 60 meters to the left, slumped against a collapsed wall. The other men didn't run. They dove behind broken bricks and twisted steel. Their training kicked in. They scanned for muzzle flash. They listened for a second shooter. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. The shots kept coming. Crack. A machine gunner trying to set up his MG-42 jerked backward. Crack. A corporal pointing to a window collapsed. Crack. Crack. In less than 5 minutes, 8 men were dead. The 4 survivors, terrified and broken, crawled through the rubble for 2 hours before they reached their own lines. When they finally made their report, their commanding officer didn't believe them. There was no muzzle flash. There was no sound of a spotter. There was no indication of where the shots originated. The only thing they knew for certain was this. The shots came when they exhaled, when they moved, when they blinked. It was a hunter, a sniper, who didn't just shoot targets. He hunted breath itself. What those soldiers didn't know, what the entire German Sixth Army was about to learn, was that this hunter was not a career soldier. He was a 27-year-old shepherd turned miner, a man so unassuming, so slight, he barely weighed 60 kilograms. A man who had spent his entire childhood learning to read the movement of animals across snowfields. A man who understood something the German snipers, with all their training and their high-powered scopes, did not. He understood stillness, and he was about to teach the Wehrmacht the most terrifying lesson of the Eastern Front. This is the story of Vasily Zaitsev and the simple, forgotten breath control trick that made him the ghost of Stalingrad. To understand how a single miner could terrorize an army, you first have to understand where he came from. Vasily Zaitsev was not born in a city. He was born in 1915 in the Ural Mountains, in a village called Yeleninskoye. So remote it didn't have electricity, didn't have roads, didn't even appear on most maps. His grandfather was a hunter. His father was a hunter. His uncles were hunters. And from the moment Vasily could walk, he was taught the old way. The way of the silent predator. The way of the wolf. This was not sport hunting. This was not recreational shooting. This was survival. In the winter, the Urals are a frozen wasteland that stretches as far as the eye can see. Temperatures drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius, sometimes minus 40 degrees Celsius. The snow is deep, soft, and blinding white. The wind cuts through clothing like a knife. The deer, the wolves, the foxes, they all blend into that white. A single mistake, a single sound, a single unnecessary movement, and the animal vanishes like smoke. You go home hungry. Your family goes hungry. Vasily's grandfather gave him his first rifle when he was 12 years old. It was a Berdon single-shot rifle, older than the Russian Revolution. Its wooden stock worn smooth by decades of hands. No scope, just iron sights. And one rule: one shot, one kill. If you miss, you don't eat. His grandfather would take him into the snowfields before dawn. They would lie in the snow for hours, waiting, not talking, barely breathing. His grandfather taught him to read the landscape, to see the faint depression in the snow that meant a deer path, to notice the broken twig that meant an animal had passed, to smell the wind for the musk of a predator. But most importantly, his grandfather taught him the secret that would later save his life in Stalingrad. He taught him to hunt his own breath. This is where the secret modification begins. When a 12-year-old Vasily Zaitsev hunted deer in the snowfields, he didn't just aim and fire. He learned to wait, to become part of the landscape. He learned that a deer doesn't just see movement, it hears breath. In the frozen silence of the Urals, a single exhale can travel 200 meters. The cloud of warm vapor in the cold air is like a smoke signal. So Vasily learned the trick. He learned to slow his breathing, to take a breath, hold it, fire, and only then exhale. He learned to time his shot to the moment between heartbeats, the moment of absolute stillness. This wasn't a sniper school technique. This was survival. This was the hunter's instinct that no military manual could teach. But Vasily didn't want to hunt deer. He wanted to build. When he turned 18, he left the village and went to work in the Magnitogorsk metallurgical plant. He became a miner, a laborer, in Stalin's great industrial machine. He was quiet. He was unremarkable. He was just another worker in a nation of millions. And then, in 1937, he was conscripted into the Soviet Navy. He served in the Pacific Fleet. He learned to shoot again, this time with a Mosin Nagant rifle. He was good, but not exceptional. He was just a sailor. When World War II began, Vasily was not on the front lines. He was still in Vladivostok, thousands of miles from the fighting. He didn't see the Germans invade in 1941. He didn't see the Wehrmacht crush the Red Army at Kiev, at Smolensk, at Bryansk. He only heard the reports. The Germans were unstoppable. They were at the gates of Moscow. They were at the Volga. They were at Stalingrad. In September 1942, Vasily's unit was finally called. They were loaded onto trains. They traveled for 10 days across Russia. When they arrived at the Volga River across from Stalingrad, Vasily saw hell. The entire city was on fire. The sky was black. The river was filled with corpses. The Red Army was being slaughtered. The 62nd Army, commanded by General Vasily Chuikov, was down to its last few thousand men. They held a strip of rubble less than a kilometer wide along the riverbank. The Germans controlled the rest. The orders were simple: cross the river, reinforce the city, do not retreat. It was a death sentence. On September 22, 1942, Vasily Zaitsev and his unit crossed the Volga under heavy fire. They boarded the boats at midnight. The river was over a kilometer wide. The current was strong, and the Germans controlled the far bank. The moment the boats pushed off, the sky lit up. German artillery had spotted them. Shells began falling into the water, sending up geysers of spray. The boats to the left and right of Vasily's were hit. Men screamed as they were thrown into the freezing water. Those who survived the explosions drowned, pulled under by their heavy equipment. Vasily's boat made it halfway across before a shell landed so close the entire vessel lifted out of the water. Men were thrown overboard. Vasily held on to the gunwale, his knuckles white, his rifle slung across his back. Half his unit was killed before they even reached the opposite shore. The boats ground against the muddy bank. Vasily jumped out, his boots sinking into the cold water. He climbed out of the boat, soaking wet, his rifle in his hands, his heart pounding. He looked up at the city. It wasn't a city. It was a vision of the apocalypse. The entire skyline was on fire. Buildings burned like massive torches. The smoke was so thick it blotted out the stars. The air was filled with the sound of explosions, the rattle of machine guns, the screams of men. This was not the Ural Mountains. This was not a hunting ground. This was hell itself. But as Vasily moved through the ruins, as he climbed over the rubble and ducked through the shattered buildings, he saw something the other soldiers didn't. He saw a hunting ground. Chuikov's strategy was brutal and simple. Hug the Germans. Get so close to their lines that their artillery and Luftwaffe can't bomb you without hitting their own men. Turn the city into a close-quarters knife fight. The Germans called this Rattenkrieg, rat warfare. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was 24 hours. Vasily was assigned to the 1047th Rifle Regiment. He was just a private, just another body to throw at the Germans, just another name on a roster that would be crossed out within 24 hours. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was less than a day. Officers expected men to die. They planned for it. But within days, his commanders noticed something strange. Vasily didn't die. He didn't charge blindly into German machine gun fire like the others. He didn't panic when artillery fell. He moved differently. He moved like a predator stalking prey. He would go out on patrol with his squad, and while the others fired wildly at shadows, Vasily would take his time. He would find a position, he would wait, and then one shot, one kill. Every time he went out on patrol, Germans died, but not just any Germans. Officers, machine gunners, radio operators, the important targets, the ones whose deaths mattered. His company commander, Lieutenant Medvedev, saw potential. He had been a hunter himself before the war. He recognized the signs. He pulled Vasily aside after a particularly successful patrol where Vasily had killed 3 Germans with 3 shots. He told him, "You're wasted in the infantry. You're a hunter. I'm making you a sniper." Vasily was issued a Mosin Nagant 9130 with a PU scope. It was a good rifle, a reliable rifle. The Mosin Nagant had been the standard Russian military rifle since 1891. It was simple, durable, and in the right hands, deadly accurate. The PU scope was a 3.5 times magnification optic. It was the best equipment the Red Army had. But Vasily looked at the scope, and he remembered his grandfather's rule. 1 shot, 1 kill. And he remembered something else. He remembered hunting in the Urals. He remembered the glint of ice on distant peaks. He remembered how his grandfather had taught him to never use metal that could reflect light. The problem wasn't the rifle. The problem was the city. Stalingrad was not a forest. It was not a snowfield. It was smoke, dust, and fire. A scope was useless in smoke. A scope fogged in the cold. A scope glinted in the rare moments of sunlight. Vasily did what Simo He-ha did. He removed the scope. He went back to iron sights. His officers thought he was insane. Every other sniper in the Red Army used a scope. Vasily refused. He told them, "I don't need to see the enemy's face. I need to see his breath." This was his piano wire. This was his illegal modification. But that wasn't his only trick. The others were even more terrifying. German snipers in Stalingrad were the best in the world. They were trained at the Zossen Sniper School outside Berlin. They had the best equipment. They had Mauser Kar, 98K rifles with Zeiss 4x scopes. They had ghillie suits. They had spotters. They operated in pairs. Their doctrine was simple. Find a position with a clear field of fire. Wait for a target. Kill it. Move. But Vasily didn't fight like a German sniper. He fought like a Ural shepherd. He understood that in the ruins of Stalingrad, the hunter wasn't the one with the best scope. It was the one who understood breath, light, and time. His first trick was breath discipline. Every German sniper, every Soviet sniper, they all had the same problem. When you're lying in a sniper position for hours, cold, hungry, terrified, your breath becomes ragged. You breathe through your mouth. You pant. And in Stalingrad, in the cold autumn mornings, that breath is visible. Vasily trained himself to breathe like he did in the Urals. Slow, controlled, through the nose. He would take a breath, hold it for 10, 15, sometimes 20 seconds while he lined up his shot. He would fire between heartbeats. And only after the shot, when the sound had already echoed and died, would he exhale, slowly, silently. To a German counter-sniper scanning the ruins, Vasily didn't exist. He was a corpse, a shadow, a ghost. His second trick was position selection. German snipers liked height. They liked to shoot from the upper floors of ruined buildings. From there, they had a clear view of Soviet positions. But Vasily knew that height made you a target. So he did the opposite. He set up in basements, in ground floor windows, in piles of rubble that looked like nothing. He would crawl into a position at 3 a.m. before dawn and not move for 12 hours. He would urinate where he lay. He would eat nothing. He would become part of the ruin. And when a German sniper, confident in his elevated position, would shift his weight, adjust his scope, take a breath, Vasily would see it. He would see the tiny movement, the faint exhale, and he would fire. One shot, one kill. His third trick was timing. German snipers operated on a schedule. They would take their positions at dawn. They would shoot during the day. They would extract at dusk. Vasily studied them like a shepherd studies wolves. He learned their patterns. He would let them set up. He would let them take a shot. And then, when they were most confident, most relaxed, he would fire. Not at their body, at their head, from 400 meters, with iron sights. In less than 2 weeks, Vasily Zaitsev had killed 32 German soldiers. Word spread through the 62nd Army. There was a sniper, a shepherd from the Urals. He didn't miss. The Red Army command took notice. This was not just about kills. This was about morale. The Soviet soldiers in Stalingrad were being slaughtered. They needed a hero. They needed hope. Vasily was pulled from the line. He was brought to the political department. They interviewed him. They photographed him. And then they turned him into a legend. On October 31st, 1942, the Red Army newspaper Krasnaya Zvezda, Red Star, published an article. The headline read, "Vasily Zaitsev has killed 149 Germans in Stalingrad." The number was propaganda. The number was exaggerated, but the man was real. The kills were real, and the effect was immediate. Overnight, Vasily Zaitsev became the ghost of Stalingrad. Soviet soldiers would whisper his name before going on patrol. They believed if Zaitsev was out there, they had a chance. But the Germans read the article too, and they were enraged. This was not just a propaganda problem. This was a battlefield problem. German officers in the Sixth Army were reporting that their men were terrified to move during the day. They were terrified to go near windows. They were terrified to breathe. The sniper in the Soviet newspaper was real, and he was killing them. The Wehrmacht High Command made a decision. They would send their best. They would send a sniper, so skilled, so experienced. He would hunt the hunter. His name was Heinz Thorwald. Or at least, that's what the Soviet propaganda said. The truth of this duel, this legendary sniper battle, is murky. Some historians believe Thorwald never existed, that he was a Soviet invention to build the myth of Zaitsev. Others believe he was real, but his name was changed. What is undeniable is this. In November 1942, Vasily Zaitsev was hunting a German sniper who was hunting him, and it became the most famous sniper duel in history. According to Zaitsev's own account, written years later, it began with a note. A German sniper had killed 2 Soviet snipers in Zaitsev's sector. Both were experienced men. Both were Vasily's students. The shots were too good, too precise. Both men had been shot through the head from over 300 meters. This was not a regular soldier. This was not a lucky shot. This was a master. Vasily knew immediately that he was being hunted. The Germans had sent someone specifically for him, someone who had read the newspaper articles, someone who wanted revenge. Vasily changed his tactics. He didn't hunt during the day. He hunted at dawn and dusk, when the light was uncertain. He moved his positions constantly, never using the same hide twice. He set traps. He would place a helmet on a stick in one window and watch from another position 50 meters away to see where the shot came from. He would leave his coat draped over rubble to look like a sleeping soldier. For 3 days, nothing happened. The German sniper was patient, too patient. He wasn't taking the bait. He was watching, learning, studying. This was a chess match, a deadly game where one mistake meant death. On the morning of the 4th day, Vasily arrived at his position before dawn. He crawled into a pile of rubble that overlooked a stretch of no man's land. There was a wrecked T-34 tank in the middle of the field, about 250 meters away. It had been there for weeks. Vasily had studied it many times. He knew every detail of it. But something was different. The shadows around the tank looked wrong. There was a faint disturbance in the rubble near its treads. Vasily watched. He didn't move. He controlled his breathing. He became part of the ruins. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. The temperature climbed. Sweat ran down his back. He didn't move. Then, at 11:15 a.m., he saw it. A faint glint, just a fraction of a second. The reflection of sunlight off a scope lens. It came from beneath the wrecked tank, exactly where Vasily had thought. The German was good. He had chosen the same position Vasily would have chosen. But he had made one mistake. He had a scope. And in Stalingrad, scopes glinted. Vasily didn't fire. Not yet. He needed to be certain. He needed to see more than just a glint. He waited for another hour. The sun moved, the shadows shifted, and then, at 11:32 a.m., he saw it again. Not a glint this time. A breath, a faint cloud of vapor rising from beneath the tank. The German sniper had exhaled, just once, just for a moment. But that was enough. Vasily took his own breath, He held it. He aimed not at the breath, but at the shadow beneath it. He fired. The shot echoed across the ruins. For a moment, nothing. And then silence. The breathing stopped. Vasily waited another 2 hours. Then slowly, he crawled forward. He reached the tank. Beneath it, he found the body of a German officer. He was wearing a sniper's ghillie suit. He had a Mauser Kar 98K with a Zeiss scope. In his pocket, Vasily found a notebook. The pages were filled with notes, positions, wind calculations, Soviet patrol schedules. This man was a professional. Vasily took the rifle. He took the scope. He crawled back to his lines. When he returned, his commanders asked if he got him. Vasily nodded. The one who was hunting me is dead. That night, the political department wrote another article. Vasily Zaitsev defeats Germany's top sniper in legendary duel. The name Heinz Thorvald appeared for the first time. Whether it was the man's real name or a propaganda invention, it didn't matter. The myth was born. And the myth was what mattered, because the real ripple effect wasn't the duel. It was the fear. By December 1942, Vasily Zaitsev had become more than a sniper. He had become a teacher. The Red Army Command created sniper schools in Stalingrad. Vasily was pulled from the front lines to train others. He taught them his tricks, the breath control, the position selection, the timing. He taught them the hunter's way. He created what became known as the Zaitsev movement. Groups of snipers working together using his methods. They called themselves Zaichata, the Leverets, Zaitsev's rabbits. In just 2 months, Zaitsev's students killed over 1,000 German soldiers. This wasn't just about numbers. This was psychological warfare. German soldiers in Stalingrad stopped moving during the day. They stopped going to windows. They stopped lighting cigarettes. They developed what they called sniper psychosis, a paralyzing fear that the moment you moved, the moment you breathed, you were dead. This was the same terror that Simo Häyhä inflicted on the Red Army in Finland. And now, Vasily Zaitsev was doing it to the Wehrmacht. But unlike Simo, who fought alone in the snow, Vasily had an army of ghosts behind him. He had created a doctrine, a system, a way of war. And the Germans had no answer. But war, like hunting, is never without cost. This is the explosive bullet. This is the price. On January 31st, 1943, Vasily was leading a night patrol through a minefield. The German Sixth Army was collapsing. They were surrounded. They were starving. They were eating their horses, their leather belts, anything to survive. But they were still dangerous. Cornered animals are always the most dangerous. Vasily's group was clearing a path for a Soviet assault planned for dawn. They were crawling forward through the frozen ruins, probing the ground with bayonets, looking for the telltale resistance that meant a mine. It was 2:30 in the morning. The temperature was minus 15 degrees Celsius. The sky was black. Vasily was in the lead, his rifle slung across his back, his hands feeling the ground inch by inch. He felt something, a metal disc just beneath the frost. He raised his hand to signal the men behind him to stop. And then, 10 meters to his left, someone made a mistake. A young soldier, exhausted, cold, terrified, put his weight on his forward knee before checking the ground. The mine detonated. The explosion was blinding, a white-hot flash in the darkness. The shockwave hit Vasily like a physical blow. But it wasn't the blast that got him. It was the shrapnel. Hundreds of metal fragments tore through the air. Most of them flew past him. But one piece, a jagged shard no bigger than a fingernail, hit him directly in the face. Vasily felt a searing pain in his eyes. He tried to see. He couldn't. He raised his hands to his face. He felt blood, hot blood pouring down his cheeks. He tried to open his eyes. He felt only agony. His vision was gone. Completely gone. Not darkness, just nothing. His comrades dragged him back to the Soviet lines. He was screaming, not from pain, from rage, from the knowledge that he couldn't see, that he couldn't hunt, that he was useless. They carried him through the ruins, running under fire, back to the river. He was evacuated across the Volga on a boat. He was rushed to a field hospital in a dugout on the eastern bank. The doctors examined him by candlelight. The diagnosis was catastrophic. Severe eye trauma. Metal fragments embedded in both corneas. Massive hemorrhaging. Possible permanent blindness. The ghost of Stalingrad, the man who had killed over 200 Germans with his eyes alone, was blind. For weeks, Vasily lay in darkness. He couldn't see. He couldn't hunt. He couldn't fight. The man who had spent his entire life reading the landscape, reading breath, reading movement, was trapped in blackness. The doctors told him there was a chance, a small chance. A surgeon in Moscow, Professor Vladimir Filatov, was experimenting with a new technique. Corneal transplants. It was experimental. It was dangerous. The surgery itself could kill him, but it was the only hope. Vasily was sent to Moscow by train. The journey took 3 days. He spent the entire time in darkness, listening to the sounds of the wounded around him. When he arrived, Professor Filatov examined him. The professor was honest. He said, "I can try, but I cannot promise you will see again, and I cannot promise you will survive the surgery." Vasily's response was pure shepherd's logic. He said, "A hunter who cannot see is already dead. I have nothing to lose." Vasily underwent surgery. It was agonizing. They didn't have good anesthesia. He felt everything. For months afterward, he waited in bandages. He couldn't move his head. He couldn't open his eyes. He just waited in the darkness and hoped. And then slowly, his vision returned. First, just light. Then shapes. Then finally, images. Not perfect. Not the sharp hunter's vision he once had. His left eye was permanently damaged. He could see movement, could see shapes, but the clarity was gone. His right eye was better, but still compromised. But it was enough. Enough to see. Enough to live. But by the time Vasily recovered, the Battle of Stalingrad was over. The German Sixth Army had surrendered on February 2, 1943. Field Marshal Paulus, the once proud commander, had been captured. Over 90,000 German soldiers went into Soviet captivity. Only 6,000 would ever return home. The city, that graveyard of concrete, had held. The Soviets had won, and Vasily had missed the victory. He tried to return to combat. He demanded it. He wanted to fight. He wanted to hunt again. But his vision was too damaged. The Red Army doctors examined him and made their decision. He couldn't be a sniper anymore. The man who had killed over 200 Germans with precision shots could no longer see well enough to repeat that performance. Instead, the Red Army made him an instructor. They assigned him to sniper schools behind the lines. He spent the rest of the war training snipers, teaching them the breath control, the stillness, the hunter's way. He taught thousands, and those thousands went to the front. They went to Kursk, to Berlin, to Budapest, and they killed tens of thousands of Germans using the techniques Vasily had developed in the ruins of Stalingrad. Vasily Zaitsev's real legacy wasn't his 200 confirmed kills. It was the system he created, the doctrine he built from shepherd's logic. When the war ended in 1945, Vasily was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. He was given a medal. He was given a pension. And like Simo Heiha, like Joe Foss, he went home. He didn't want fame. He didn't want parades. He became an engineer. He worked in a textile factory in Kiev. He lived a quiet life. He married. He had children. He rarely spoke of the war. But in 1969, a journalist found him. The journalist asked him the same question they all ask. How did you do it? How did you become the ghost of Stalingrad? Vasily's answer was pure hunter's logic. He said, I didn't hunt men. I hunted breath. I hunted movement. I hunted fear. And in Stalingrad, there was nothing but fear. In 1973, a Soviet author named Viktor Nekrasov wrote a fictionalized account of Vasily's duel with the German sniper. The book was banned in the USSR for being too critical of the war. But in the West, it became a legend. And in 2001, Hollywood made a film, Enemy at the Gates. It was dramatized. It was Hollywoodized. But it brought Vasily's story to the world. Vasily Zaitsev, yes, died on December 15, 1991, at the age of 76. He was buried in Kiev, but in 2006, his body was exhumed and reburied in Volgograd, the city formerly known as Stalingrad. He was given full military honors. He was laid to rest on Mamayev Kurgan, the hill that overlooks the city he saved. His grave is simple, just a stone with his name and his rank. But every year, veterans, historians, and students visit. They leave flowers. They leave bullets. They remember the shepherd who became a ghost. That's how wars are truly won. Not by grand strategies or overwhelming firepower, but by individuals who see the flaw in the system. James McKenna, the mechanic, saw a flaw in the P-38's control cables. He saw 3/8 of an inch of slack that meant death, and he fixed it with a piece of piano wire. Simo Heiha, the farmer, saw a flaw in the sniper doctrine. He saw that a scope glinted in the snow, and he fixed it by using iron sights in the cold itself. Joe Foss, the farm boy, saw a flaw in the dogfighting doctrine. He saw that you couldn't outturn a zero, but you could outthink it with deflection shooting. And Vasily Zaitsev, the shepherd, saw a flaw in modern warfare. He saw that in the chaos of Stalingrad, the hunter who controlled his breath, who understood stillness, who moved like a predator, would always defeat the soldier who relied on technology and doctrine. These are the forgotten pages, the stories of the men who broke the rules to win the war. Vasily Zaitsev died in 1991, but the doctrine he created, the breath control technique, the hunter's patience, the invisible stillness that lives on. Every sniper school in the world, from Fort Benning to Quantico, to the Russian Academy, they all teach the same lesson. Control your breath. Become the landscape. Hunt the fear. They don't always say his name, but they're teaching Vasily Zaitsev's trick, the trick of the shepherd from the Urals who turned Stalingrad into a hunting ground. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.